So great there. We're going to bring our next guest up. Joseph Crawford is going to join me on stage. We're going to talk customer data and customer experience, how data and customer experience are indisputably linked. We've already talked a little bit about that today. But Joseph, join me. All right, here he comes. Give him a round of applause.
Hey,
all right.
John.
How you doing?
Great. How are you, man?
Doing well. So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit more, talk about Glassbox?
Yeah, sure. Hi, guys. I'm Joe Crawford, Professional Services Manager at Glassbox. Glassbox is a digital experience intelligent platform that's used to capture the web and mobile experiences of all of your users. We capture those interactions, the user's experience, and we put that in a way that you can understand the user's journey from the time they enter your digital platform to the time they leave. So we have a nice booth outside. We can give a demonstration of how it works.
Yeah, but you also came from Citi prior to that, right? So tell me a little bit more about your financial service history.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So prior to Citi, I was at Morgan Stanley. I was an enterprise monitoring manager there. We used a lot of different tools to monitor the user's experience at Citi and Morgan Stanley. I work mostly with the institutional banking. And so the thing about working at banks is just the customer experience is so important and so vital. It's tough to get it quite right because there's a lot of different silos at large financial institutions, but it's so vital because it's not like with retail. If I'm going, I may be shopping at Amazon, I may be shopping at Walmart, I may switch back and forth. I could do that all day. But how many times do you change your bank accounts or your banking institution? How many times do you change your mobile phone? There are certain verticals in which, if a customer leaves, that's pretty much it. So making sure that customer experience is smooth, is positive, is crucial to banks and other industries in that nature.
Absolutely. So digital data and its connection to CX, because we all know we're a digital first world. So talk a little bit about that connection in your mind.
Yeah. The path to improving customer experience is data. You have to understand what your customers are doing before you can actually improve upon it. A lot of times I see when working with a lot of companies, there's a lot of assumptions that are made, right? There's assumptions about, well, this is exactly what our customers need. This is exactly what they want. And so we're going to develop our tools to cater to what we think is important. I gave a speech at ProductCon in New York a few months ago, and if you guys have heard it, I'm going to reiterate it here because I think it's a great analogy. There was a time where I made an assumption about what my customer wanted. So my wife was having her big birthday party, right? And I assumed that she wanted a surprise birthday party. She's gonna love this. I'm gonna get a lot of people and surprise in her room, people that she probably hasn't seen in like years. She's gonna love it. So we spent a lot of money. We got this nice venue, called up all of her friends and things like that. And we did our best to kind of surprise. We brought her into this room with a bunch of people, kind of like this. Surprise! And her face was just like, why did you put me here? Why did you bring me here? This is bad, My customer almost churned at that point. So we had to do some corrective actions to get that back on track. But a lot of times that happens in today's world when we assume that our customer likes our product in a certain way or they use our product in a certain way. And when they don't, it's a big surprise, So asking the customer, collecting that data is so important. And that's why I think customer experience and customer data are so tightly in one. You have to understand what your customer really wants so that you can drive your product to making sure that they get the experience they're expecting.
Yeah, and I think that's true, absolutely. The digital first, everything I do is I start on my phone, then I go to the website, then I call.
Right.
Unless it's really bad, then I skip to calling, right? We kind of talked about that earlier with another group, but the digital environment, though, we're talking massive amounts of data. I looked it up. It was like at one point we're creating 13 quintillion,
Wow.
18 zeros. is what quintillion is. Bytes of data, just within like an hour. So, I mean, talk about how do you make sense out of all that data?
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
Yeah, it is a big problem. But, the thing about it is that you have to start with the customer first, put them first. Like, you can have a bunch of data and just go crazy and playing in a pool of data, but why is the customer coming to your site? Why is the customer interacting with you? And then from there, you start to create a vision of how can I make the data that I'm collecting useful to understand what the customer is experiencing. So, one of the things that I do as in my job as professional services, I help people with their customer experience journey and customer experience platform. So the first thing, and I think a bunch of other speakers mentioned this today, is to kind of have like a governance platform of and understand what your vision is. What do you want to do with this data, right? And so in a lot of cases, we look at the customer's journey. We have the onboarding, we have actually marketing, the onboarding, the customer support, the renewals and expansions. So we look at the KPIs for each of those levels, like what are the key performance indicators or what metrics do we want to collect at each of those levels, right? And so we use that. We have a governance committee to say, hey, they work with the different groups, marketing, production support, customer support, say, hey, let me grab some of the KPIs. What's interesting? What's important about each stage of the customer journey for you? And we make sure we start focusing on that information first. So we start gathering that. We use the customer data platform to kind of collect that data and make it available to all the users internally so they can see what the customers are actually doing. And then on top of that, we use AI to help remove some of the biases. So you're smiling there, Sean.
Well, we were 5 for 5 using AI on the stage. So if you didn't do it, I was going to bring it up.
Okay. I think I don't want to make AI as the end-all, be-all, the solution for things. It definitely helps. But you have to use it in ethically. You have to use it in a very, strategic manner. Just don't want to put the AI solution in terms of just saying that, hey, this fixes everything. But having a vision, having a governance community within your organization, say, hey, this is what we're doing, will support the results of AI. Will help you to build, support in growing your customer data platform and gathering data, successfully out of that to understand the customer's experience.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge with those 2 letters is it means so many different things because it is such a broad capability. So, but obviously with all that data, 18 zeros after a 13, you got to make summary out of that massive amount of data at some level.
Absolutely.
So, switching gears just a little bit. So when we think about, businesses ensuring that the data supports, because we talked earlier about frictionless, right? Reduce friction in the customer journey. So how do you look at that in both the customer and the business? Because you kind of have to do, it's a balancing act, right?
No, I think the previous speaker was up here and he talked about chat box and how people are they hate to be interrupted. Sometimes it's a little bit of annoying to you're trying to, there's an objective that you want to do and then you're getting spammed by, do you need help or can you fill out this survey and things like that. And we're seeing, in my profession, I'm seeing that only a few people are actually responding to those things. Not that it's not valuable, but there's only a few folks that are responding. So, for example, statistically, when we have VOCs, Voice of the Customer, and we have surveys that are put out there, I think they're great, but we only get about up to 5% of people of your population to actually respond. What do you do about that 95%, right? How do you still get the data from those folks, to understand what their experience is? And so at Glassbox, we developed the notion of voice of the silent, right? So not only are you can get the voice of the customer, right? But what about those silent users that don't respond? I was at I was meeting with a client. He was a CXO of an organization. He says, "What keeps me up at night, Joe, are those customers that don't respond. They don't send any feedback, but then they leave us. They churn, and we don't understand why, right?" So the voice of the silent brings the notion of let's take your voice of the customer surveys. And so what Glassbox has done is says, okay, we'll take your voice of the customer surveys, and then what we'll do is we'll monitor all the users that have going through similar experiences as those users that have filled out the survey. So say, for example, you have a user that gives bad feedback. I couldn't complete the onboarding process, or I couldn't submit a payment, all right? So let's find other users that have that same flow, and then kind of map that and say that, okay, these are the other users with similar experiences. These could be the voice of the silent. Let's work on these users and see if we can increase how many users are actually experiencing the same thing that the customer who submitted the survey, how many users are actually experiencing the same flow? And then you start working on it. Then you have a bigger picture of like, okay, we have like 90% of the users are also complaining about it, even though only 10% of the users actually submitted responses. And then from there, you reduce the friction by looking at your data, using AI to kind of look at your data and create summaries of what your users are actually doing, instead of relying on, intrusive tactics of like surveys or chat box.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. So when we were preparing for this conversation, you also talked though about you were talking about the silent, but then you talked about bias.
Yeah.
Data bias as well. So what do you mean by that? Explain it a little bit more.
Yeah. So it's a good point. So a lot of times, and I'm just going back to the gathering of data and the gathering of data by different silos. So this is a situation where there's no kind of governing committee, there's no CXO office or anything like that. It's just, product teams are gathering data, marketing teams, and they're not talking to each other. So we had a situation where we had, a customer was using a bunch of surveys and getting feedback from their end users, and it kind of reminded me of like when they got all this data back. Kind of reminded me of the story of the three men with blindfolds, and they're put into a room with a big elephant, and they're asked to describe what that elephant, what the object is in the room, right? Without the blindfolds, it's an elephant, but with the blindfolds, people are going in there. The three guys goes in there, and one touches the leg and said, "Hey, this is a tree," because it feels like a tree trunk. Other person said, "No, it's a string," because they're touching the tail. And the other says it's a fire hose because they're touching the trunk. And so they're getting different pictures, but they don't understand the overall big picture. And a lot of times when you have these biases and you don't bring these guys together to understand I have a steering committee to understand what the user is experiencing, you get different results, and you develop and you address the customer in different ways, right? So again, setting up a governance, setting up a vision for customer experience within your company, it makes a big difference. And inviting these different groups to share in that knowledge, to share what those experiences are, I've seen a huge success with that, and really understanding what the customer is doing.
Yeah, well, and I think the key there is, and I've heard the thing about eating an elephant,
yeah,
one bite at a time, but
right.
That's a good one as well. But I think the key is really understanding that the users in your business, they have purpose.
Yeah.
But too often I see it's kind of like the business is like, well, we have the web and the mobile guys, they're doing their thing, and then we're doing the rest of the business.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's got to be part of that partnership as well, right?
It has to be, and that goes along with having a seamless experience for your customers. Like in today's age, I could bring up like a Google Docs on my phone, and then maybe I want to move to my office and bring up that same Google Docs on my laptop. I expect that experience is seamless. I expect that everything I typed here on my mobile phone is still there on my laptop or my tablet. I expect that if I go from wireless to using my cellular data, that experience is smooth. It's a smooth transition. So having this in mind is very important, and I've seen this a lot of times when we're working with different clients. The mobile team may have a completely different design, a look and feel, versus the web team. And that creates a disruptive experience for the customer, and just gives it initiates friction with the customer. So that's so important, is to have those teams aligned and to help them understand. Getting feedback from the customers and using tools like, Glassbox to understand that user's experience across multiple platforms is important.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of companies too that don't even call it the same thing.
Yeah.
They look at the same journey, but they have different names. The contact center, the website, on navigation calls it something different, et cetera. But exactly. And one thing I'm looking over here at the person who asked about the contact center and the call center, and I'll just add, based on this conversation, that transcript you have tells a lot about the digital experience too, because for sure they're calling up and saying, I tried to do this on the website.
Yeah.
So you want to make your contact center super valuable, start sharing that with the digital team and show them how much power you have in that. So a little side note there, but that's absolutely. So as we think about then, balancing, collecting the data, the need for this data, but the need to obviously from a security or privacy and so forth, trust and transparency, if you will. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, we're seeing that more and more with even with when you're using analytics tools, the right to be forgotten, the right not to be captured. So it's very important, and it builds trust with the customer. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot with the clients that we use is that you have to be transparent in your communication, of course, with your customer. Letting them know, one, hey, this is the data that we collect. You have the right to refuse it. These are some changes that we're providing that we're going to be instrumenting in our platform. There's security changes and things like that. It's so important. There's an ethical part of that as well. We collect a lot of data. We make assumptions about personalization of data. And there was one person that gave me a really interesting story about how they didn't get it right. There was a retail company that was monitoring users' interactions and their purchasing habits and things like that. So, for example, there was one situation where this couple they thought they were pregnant, right? And they purchased a pregnancy test, right? And they did this using their parents' account on this retail bank, right? So all of a sudden, like a few days later, this AI was like, all right, I'm going to be really smart. I'm going to personalize this experience. I see that they purchased a pregnancy test. Congratulations to them. And so all of a sudden, the parents start seeing a bunch of advertisements for Pampers and bottles and things like that. And they were like, Sally, what's happening here? And so that was a situation where the trust is kind of eroded. Like, how did this retail company know that this is what was going on in my life? So being transparent with the customers and being smart about how you use personalizations is very important. Keeping that and just not doing that blindly, but understanding, getting the feedback from your customers and making sure you're doing that in a very constructive and productive way.
Absolutely. We're going to open up to questions here in just a little bit, so get ready for that. But as we think then about digital and maybe think ahead a little bit, where do you see things going, especially in this space of digital and moving beyond the now into kind of this future state?
Yeah, I think here, especially in financial institutions, like I mentioned, collaborating internally is so important. Like I said, I worked at Citi, worked at Morgan Stanley, large organizations where we were used to brick and mortar. We were used to people coming to us. We were used to being the sole provider of financial instruments and things like that. But in today's world, it's more on the use. The users are finding different ways to get what they need and to get it fast, right? To get it without a frictionless experience. So for example, being able to trade stock without having to go to a financial institution and sit with a financial advisor has become kind of the norm today. There's a lot of disruption in the industry and in the industry today, and we as financial institutions need to make sure that we're understanding that people have other options, and so and you look at other examples of disruptions in terms of like the brick and mortar, Toys R Us, Red Lobster, and things like that. You have a lot of our brick and mortar retail companies are closing down. A lot of banks are consolidating their brick and mortar places because the digital transformation has made such an impact. Also, being aware of just even the social aspect of reviews and things like that is super important, and being sensitive to those things. We have to put the customer first in everything we do. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, let's transition to some questions in the audience. So any questions? I can't see. Oh, in the corner. Okay. Oh, they were not inside. So here they come. In the corner over there.
Hi. Here you go. Hi, me again, Amanda from CIBC. So you said we have to understand what the customer wants, and you talked about putting the customer first, but then there's what the bank wants or what the organization wants. So how do we find the right balance between what the customer wants and what the company wants, what's good for the company in terms of cost and so on?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. There has to be a balance, and that's why I talked a little bit about establishing the. So you're providing a product, right? We're providing a product. We know that our customer. We're providing a way for customers to view their account balances, to make payments and things like that. So we know what we're providing. We have to make sure that we understand the journey that our customer goes through in interacting with our product, right? So that's the balance there. So we know that if the customer, so for example, if I'm inviting somebody over to eat, right? I know they're gonna have to come through my front door, right? I want to make sure that door is clear. When they come in, I want to make sure that the house is clean. I want to make sure that when they dine with me, they have a great experience, right? So I'm offering a meal, but the customer and my client or my guest wants to be able to have a good time in my house. So, making sure that I pave a way for a smooth journey for the products and services that I provide is important.
I think balance is a key too, because in the grand scheme of things, anything done digitally is benefiting the company.
Right.
Really, that's part of the cost reduction and efficiency and effectiveness, but it's finding what's right at that point. And sometimes I know when I consult with companies, I tell them, don't make the digital asset something that locks them in. If it's something they should be talking to someone about, get it as quick as possible out of it. Like the chatbot, if you ask a certain question, program it to say, great, I'm going to route you to someone right now, because you don't want to even try to do that. So you want to balance that, because it is about digitization, and even I would assume in Glassbox you're looking at options though, but it's about also getting the right things digitally done versus all things.
Exactly. You're right, and every like I said, your customers are your customers, and you have to understand what they want and what they expect out of your product and your service. And like to your point, Sean, removing all of the friction points is important. You have to understand what what's causing friction, and again, not making assumptions is going to be key. You really have to get the data to understand what the customers are doing, and balance between voice of the customer, CSAT scores, the collections of data, outside of their feedback, and balancing the two is important. And then be willing to make those adjustments, right? The thing about it is just to make those adjustments may require more than just your team, right? So it has to be a balance too internally, and a centralized focus and agreement of this is what we want to do to improve our customers' journey and experience with our product. So,
all right. Any other questions? All right. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining me on stage. It was great.
Enjoyed it.
A round of applause.
All right. Thank you.